This week on The Droids, we talk about Benioff and Weiss exiting Star Wars and the Mandalorian trailer, plus much, much more, all here on The Droids. Hello and welcome into The Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars podcast, a brand new Star Wars podcast. This is the inaugural edition. I am Mike alongside Chris. Chris, we are
I know this is episode 3. I'm a huge fan.
Some of the other
I was of that. That's why I got discussion. Right? This was probably my night that I wasn't a Star Wars when I first viewing the little one, and like I think that after this movie,
I mean, I think I'd like Star Wars before I knew it, so I went out and saw it.
These are droids you're looking for. 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 Read what they wrote.
Welcome back to The Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars podcast. Alongside Sam, I am Mike, and it's a buttoned-up boys kind of podcast. There's a lot to talk about, so much news this week. That's why these two guys are here. That's why you have us for the podcast, because there's so much news to get through. You don't want to waste time. You don't want to go off track. Don't need a hot and fresh. Don't need some, other world examples of whatever else comes out of those other guys. This is straight to business.
that's right. There will be no wings talk here. We are going to keep it right to the...
Hold up. Hold up.
We respect your commutes. We know that you are here for the news and the news only. So I'm happy to just it's a big week, man. It's chock-a-block, as they say.
Chock-a-block full, of course. I will say, for those of you who are looking more for the Wings cast, we'll get back to it. Don't worry. We've got more to talk about. Roy, Helen, Antonio, Lowell, Hackett's, everybody. We're going to get to it. Don't feel like you're missing out. We're going to get there. But we have to start with the biggest news. And we're going to get to that in one moment. We do have to run through all of the different social media. You can follow us on DroidsPod on Twitter, DroidsPod on Instagram. Of course, you can find us on Facebook, The Droids Podcast. Email us, droidspod@gmail.com. And, of course, rate and review us on iTunes. We will be forever in your debt if you do. Benioff and Weiss, the crew behind Game of Thrones, the two individuals who helped create that series, turned it into the massive blockbuster that changed the course of television, that changed the course of media for the foreseeable future. Probably one of the reasons why we have The Mandalorian in the form that it is. Benioff and Weiss from Game of Thrones, who had signed on in February 2018 to write a trilogy, and potentially also have some other fingers in how they create that series, have left Lucasfilm. They will no longer be creating anything for Disney, no longer working on any Star Wars projects. There are a myriad of reactions to this news. My first instinct was, all right, I'm not too broken up about this. This allows Kathleen Kennedy, Lucasfilm, Bob Iger to find someone who is going to actually know how to end something. What's yet to be seen if JJ knows how to end anything, but we're about to find out in a little less than 2 months. However, I think one of the things that had concerned me all along is that Benioff and Weiss were really very successful based on other source material. I'm not saying they're not talented. I'm not saying they wouldn't have brought a very interesting perspective and potentially done some very interesting stories, because there was a rumor that they were working on the origin story of the Jedi beyond the Skywalkers. That's maybe what their films would have been about. However, we don't know what they're capable of when they have to come up with the story on their own, with the exception of the last season of Game of Thrones. And even though I know you're a book guy, Sam, the last season of Game of Thrones didn't quite work out so well, so I'm not that broken up that we're not going to see what Star Wars would be from the two guys who also thought they could make the series Confederate on HBO. So I think it's sort of a win-win, but there's a lot of other things that kind of you have to talk about with this news, because now this is the fifth filmmaker pair that is left after being hired by Kathleen Kennedy. So there's still things to talk about within that. However, I'm not too broken up. Now let's bump up the Rian Johnson trilogy.
Yeah. Concur. Mike, you said a lot there, man. And I
had a lot to say.
I agree with. I'm glad because I think I do have a blind spot on these guys' biggest work. I did not watch Game of Thrones. I know the story from reading it. I was sick of it by the time it started. But I think I think the shame of them going away is that they know how to manage budget. They know how to do big effects driven things. They know how to steer massive ships, and they know how to make for better or worse, like really engaging, conversation worthy pop culture.
Yep.
So that was all the strengths. Those are the obvious reasons they were hired, and losing them, is a bummer, because you think like, man, Star Wars is a massive thing to undertake, and it's also a bummer that this was you talked about losing filmmakers, losing pairs, people exiting projects, since Disney and acquired Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy's been steering the ship. This is the first time that we lost creators who were doing an original trilogy. This was going to be a long-form story told over several movies that was from I was going to say singular mind, but singular pair of minds, right, with one vision. It's one of the biggest criticisms that I think can pretty fairly be leveled at the, saga movies, which I love, which we've talked about. I don't want to be misinterpreted or misquoted here, but the one criticism that I think can be fairly leveled at them is that they have clearly had some variance in their direction, in their overall vision. It does not quite feel like what Lucas did with the original trilogy, or like what more recently, Kevin Feige's done with the Marvel series, in terms of singular vision, driving course, single story, all pieces, always telling that. I think that's also some of what makes it so beautiful, is that you get these little flourishes of the individual directors and storytellers in there. But this was going to be something that was, conceived and produced and written by one duo, and they're gone. Yeah. So right now, in terms of that type of storytelling, all we've got is Rian Johnson. Which, I mean, if I'm saying all we've got is Rian Johnson, that's the guy I want. That's who I want. But
if you were doing a fantasy director team, I think that Rian Johnson might be a top 5 pick, maybe not, if not the number 1 pick in a fantasy blockbuster director league. Do those exist? Should we start those? Should we make that a thing?
I think they do now. I think. Also copyright trademark. Droids Pod 2019. Droids Pod LLC. Oh God, we're not an L. What are we?
No, we're not.
We're a group of friends, group of buds.
I think you make a very strong point. It's something that has been missing. You do want that individual vision of what the whole story is going to be, and even if they didn't hang on to write all of it, but they at least wrote what was the outline, what was the overall story of where they wanted it to go, that could have been a little bit refreshing from what we have had. I think now that we potentially get Rian Johnson's trilogy moved up, the thing to think about was that this was supposed to be the 2022 film. This was supposed to be 3 years from now when they get back into Star Wars movies, as they do all these series, and now they're left scrambling. I'm sure Rian Johnson could bump it up and be ready to go, but they're still concerned that clearly from Disney and from a minor community about Rian Johnson directing another set of films, and I think they just keep on leaning in on it, but I don't know that they want to go through what is the vitriol of the toxic fandom, which was even mentioned by Benioff and Weiss, or at least in terms of insider sources, that they didn't want to deal with another toxic fandom. And hey, if you actually thought about the way your characters would normally act if they were human and not rush their stories in 6 episodes, maybe you wouldn't have to deal with the toxic fandom.
I think they just know they stand to make more money by, leaning in and doing the best work they can for their $250 million deal. Like all the spin. I read all the articles. I shared all the articles with you guys. I don't know. I don't think the fandom had quite as much to do with it. I mean, I think those guys probably do feel a little beat up. They probably do feel a little bit embattled after their experience on Thrones. But here's the thing. I was never. Again, I didn't have the background on them. I was never so excited for these guys that I was falling over. I think I want to address the thing that you talk a lot about moving Rian Johnson's trilogy or his first movie up to that 2022 slot. I don't see that happening. I think what this means is we get a longer break.
Don't you think? Well, wow. I think the timing there. I don't think that we'll have a longer break because they still are going to have to look at their quarterly earnings and say, we have to have a Star Wars movie in here. We can't wait too long. And even if Solo, one film, didn't perform, they maybe take a year or two off, but I can't see them going more than the 3 that they already set out, because eventually they're going to be like, hey, you notice how we're not getting $1 billion box office once every 2 years? Oh, I think we're going to need to go back to that.
I think they're going to rely on Marvel. They've got I think they're supposedly going to release some Avatar movies.
But look at this year. This year is going to be the high water mark because you have Avengers Endgame, and you had a Spider-Man movie, and you're going to have the final Star Wars movie. What they're going to set, and Lion King, all that they did this year, they're not going to be like, oh, we're okay having 3 Marvel movies and not having a Star Wars movie every couple years, because they're going to have to justify all that they've spent, the $71 billion they spent to buy Fox and all of their films, that I think they have to really, and unfortunately, milk the properties they have, because you can't miss out on $1 billion in a year where you're supposed to be making a certain level of earnings or whatever they expect.
They bought all those properties from Fox, so use them too.
But is an X-Men movie going to get the people in the seats the way a Star Wars movie does?
No, nowhere close. But especially not now. Oh my God!
Well, if you put Feige
what a
behind
tragic
it,
series! What a tragic series to watch.
Fassbender and McAvoy I loved so much in First Class, and then I didn't even watch the last one. I didn't even bother with Dark Phoenix.
I remember when the first X-Men movie came out. And it was like the first of the modern wave of like serious comic book movies. It was the first live action X-Men, really like superpower movies to come out. And I was so excited. And my dad had a colleague whose husband was a comic book artist. And he and his friends rented out a theater in my hometown. And like, I didn't know you could even do that. So they all went. And I guess so before my dad, I think, took off work to take me to go see it. And before he and I went to go see it, he told me, he was like, Martin, shout out Martin Velez. He was like, Martin and his friends saw this on opening night with a rented out theater, and they said it was incredible. And I do think no matter how that film has aged for you, and against the modern MCU films and all the things that are that first X-Men when it came out was something it was really special. It was fun. It was there was some charisma. It was funny.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Some great effects. So I love that movie. I still have a place in my heart for it.
Totally.
So anyway,
if it was a VHS, I would have worn out the VHS. But I think by that point it was a DVD, right?
And then, it would have been. I think there. Yeah, it was 2000. It would have been.
Yeah.
It would have been a DVD. But there was probably VHS out there. But man, now they're doing Dark Phoenix and nobody cares.
No. But you also are wasting a lot of talent. Also, they wasted Oscar Isaac. I mean, they've never
had a casting problem.
No. I mean, they might have it if they try to, they have to recast Wolverine. Anyway, we got away. It's Buttoned Up Boys Pod. We went off on a sidetrack. What happened?
Oh, no. We're never going to hear the end of this.
$250 million for Netflix. The moment that was announced, I think we said it on the pod. It might have been you, Sam, that said, "All right, that's the beginning of the end of Benioff."
Yeah, they're
gone, and it was. It really was.
Of course,
and those rumors all said Kathleen Kennedy was very miffed when she found out they were going to be splitting their time.
Well, here's the thing. It sounds like for her to be mad about it, it means A, she didn't know, and I mean maybe that was maybe these deals all have to happen. Kind of in silence and behind closed doors and stuff. But, you have a deal to do a trilogy for the biggest franchise in cinema history. And, you don't tell the producer who hired you, hey, we've got another deal to develop a bunch of TV series. And then when you read into the details, the projects were supposed to be being developed concurrently. Netflix wasn't going to wait. They also had a clause that they would have to be on site for the, production of the Netflix shows. It's this was never going to work. This was never going to happen. And frankly, they knew it. They knew what they were jeopardizing,
Yep.
and whether it was just purely going after the money, or whether it was Netflix saying like, hey, not only are we going to kick you this much money, but we're going to let you do anything you want. It doesn't have to make sense with the existing canon, the Star Wars universe and stuff.
The pressure isn't there because even if they don't acknowledge,
because nobody cares about Netflix anymore. I mean, here's the thing. Here's the thing that was bad is they took a $250 million deal to like go do more on the Titanic. It's like the Netflix is like slowly sinking. Their content hasn't been good like in ages, and all
Mindhunter season 2.
Oh, that's a good point. Wait! I have not watched Mindhunter, and I have heard repeatedly how great it is.
And we're not even a year removed from Alfonso Cuarón's film that debuted on Netflix. Which it's escaping me, even though I loved it.
Roma,
yeah.
Roma. Well, their movies. Okay,
not even a year removed from that.
I maybe came out a little hot against Netflix, but I am a little. I'm very limited in what I watch on Netflix, and I'm also like very
Ryan
bullish.
would also fight you on Dark Crystal and how great that is.
I'm very bullish right now on. You know what? You've just named a bunch of things. I'm thinking of like all the things that I watched on Netflix, which were like probably 5 years ago and utter trash. So
I'm glad we can put this to
about.
bed right away. Netflix is not drowning. They're not the Titanic.
I don't know, man. I think they have some rough days ahead between Disney Plus, HBO Max.
Do you want to mention the one that didn't even get out of the shipyard? Apple TV, that is about to die on arrival with their
yikes
awful slate of shows. I haven't watched any of them. The debuts Friday. You probably listen to this podcast. They're already out. You may have seen a few episodes. It doesn't look good for the first offering. Now, Apple has enough money to do another round and try to improve things.
If you're listening to our pod, I'm going to assume that you probably started with For All Mankind.
Most likely.
And that one not only looks compelling, but it also is the one it's the show that's kind of coming out with looking pretty strong.
Yeah.
But yeah, the rest of the slate, brutal.
Well, from what it sounds like, morning show is worth watching in terms of, they put so much money into it and those actors are great and it has enough soap opera-esque cliffhangers to keep you going, but it's almost inessential is the way that it's framed. Like the story that it's trying to tell is not essential. Here we are again. How did we get away, Sam? How did we, we were talking about Netflix and the deal with Benioff and Weiss. I think last thing to say about Benioff and Weiss is I try to get us back on track. I'm the one leading us off on these tangents today.
I'm sorry I didn't bring my buttons today.
I know. Well, we are recording this one a bit early. We haven't gotten our buttons on because this is an early morning recording edition for those of you listening. It doesn't matter what time of day it is for you, but we have not gotten our buttons all buttoned up.
It's the morning show.
Oh, boy.
Back to Apple TV Plus.
Are we getting $2 million an episode?
Are you not? I've been spending mine like water.
Oh, man. Wow. Then I guess we're all taking off and we don't need this pod anymore. Anyway. Benioff and Weiss were at the Austin Film Festival, I believe, just about a week ago, talking about their experience with Game of Thrones. I think some of the things that came out of that conversation that they said, Kathleen Kennedy heard that and said she was done. No, that's not. There's been a long series of events that have led to Benioff and Weiss being leaving Star Wars. But I think from that, you got a pretty good indication that they didn't really know what they wanted to do once they got beyond the books, which seemed pretty clear with what the final season was. But I think there was a big reaction to, wow, they made a terrible pilot. And if they made a terrible pilot, that means they'd make a terrible Star Wars. No. And also the news about them, it wasn't news. Everybody knew that they made a pilot that was awful years ago and then remade the first episode, and that's how they made the series. That wasn't news to me, but what sounded like a lot of we were just making it up as we went along is an interesting thing when you think about them beyond the books. It's easy to make up how you adapt something when you have source material. It's not the same thing when you have to come up with the story yourself, which we touched on already. But to hear that in them being at a festival makes it a little more clear. Again, you don't know what you would get from them in a Star Wars.
Well, I think that, and I mean, I do want to address, sorry, I know we've got more to talk about, but just the other thing that I want to talk about is, so much of this in the press, they're the headlines are all, Benioff and Weiss leave, and the subheaders are all, Kathleen Kennedy, leadership, in question, can she steer this and everything? And I know that
another shakeup.
Yeah, there's the the fan community. It seems to be, you're kind of either a pro Kennedy fan or you're against her. I think, I don't know. I'm still pro Kennedy. I still think if you look at the movies we're getting, I enjoy them. I think they look awesome. I think it's a huge ship to steer. I think she's primed for it. I think she's doing a great job. I think, we live in a different era, and I think this idea of everybody looking and going, look at how many directors are, this rotating door of directors, look at how many great people, filmmakers she's brought in and who've left. It's like, this is part of Hollywood. This happens on all types of movies. The difference is all those other types of movies aren't the biggest franchise in the world, and it's not getting covered. Yeah. So you hear about it later. Think of how many movies you've heard of that were originally supposed to be directed by X or Y, or that were originally, there was an early draft written by so-and-so. Like, those things, these have always happened. These rotating doors, these revolving doors, the deals falling through, the lost movies we never see. This has always been a part of cinema history. The difference is, we didn't used to live in a culture where people had enough time and podcasts to talk about it, So I do not think that this is indicative of Kathleen Kennedy's, any kind of shortcoming. I think that Disney and Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm maybe need to evaluate, ways to adjust PR. And I mean, nothing is going to do that better than, great movies that are hopefully more universally loved. And again, looking at the box office, these things are universally loved. But I'm suspect of anybody who's jumping to conclusions that Kathleen Kennedy isn't doing her job right. I think this is just part of the business.
Sam, how likely is it that we're going to get that Quentin Tarantino Star Trek movie?
Well, I talked to Q yesterday, and I mean, he was putting it at about 95%. He said, and I'll remove expletives, but he said, I just want to be effing done with my effing 10th movie. And so, I crapped out a Star Trek idea, and we're gonna make it. Paramount needs me. That was roughly what he said.
Because, I mean, a perfect example of someone saying that this person has been attached. Tarantino, you could say, has been attached throughout for the last 25 years to potentially some movie that then never happened. So your point is sound, and yeah, anything, even the stuff that we've heard that's been announced for a lot of different properties, I don't believe we actually are going to see it until there's a trailer, until there's actually visuals.
Mike, let me talk about a gentleman you may be familiar with, Danny Boyle, and another gentleman that I know we're all familiar with. Of course, I'm talking about Bond, James Bond.
All right, we got Star Trek, we got Bond. Everybody at home, what's our last one? We're going to get to it.
Yeah, if you're playing bingo, watch out. Anyway, we can. I like I said, I think this is part of the business, and I think the thing that is new and is the PR cycle around it.
Well, I set up what I thought was the perfect segue in talking about I don't believe something real until we see a trailer. We have an additional trailer for The Mandalorian, which I didn't, and I think a lot of people haven't really let this set in, because now that we're in this constant, entertainment news cycle, the constant 24-hour news, everything that we have with access to so much media at all times, we are about to see a Star Wars TV show in less than 2 weeks.
Mike, I'm sorry. I think you misspoke. It sounded like you said a Star Wars TV show?
Yes.
Surely you mean a cartoon.
No. It's live action, Sam.
You're talking live action, and you meant Star Wars, not
No, it's
not any other property?
It's not Star Trek. It is not Star Trek. This is Star Wars.
Wow.
Think about
how
if you
exciting
heard that.
is this?
If you heard that in the mid-90s, when there hadn't been a Star Wars movie since 83, you didn't know that the special editions were coming, you didn't know that the prequels were coming, and they were like, we're going to have a Star Wars TV show. I'm still just... I went to Target to look for a Mandalorian figure because I just wanted to take a moment to commemorate the first Star Wars TV show. Couldn't find it. Sold out. Didn't have it.
Yeah,
very
Amazon. It's in
disheartening.
my Amazon cart because I was going to get you one, and they just kept pushing the date back, and now it was like November 30th, and I was like, well, I'm ditching this.
Sam,
Sorry.
that's very, very thoughtful of you. I appreciate it. All right,
It's the idea that counts.
Let's talk about this trailer because we saw the first trailer. There's some repeated images. I'm actually really surprised that they started this trailer with the exact same shot. We won't go shot for shot this time. But if you look at it, it's the same shot of the Stormtrooper helmets in the sand, and then the Mandalorian walks by, and you see them on a spike. And I just thought, I'm like, wow, this looks exactly the same as the first trailer. And I was like, okay.
Well, had the first trailer ever been on TV? I watched.
No, you're right.
I
I
watched
don't-
the World Series this week.
Yep.
Or like over the last week and a half or whatever, which was incredible. To all you baseballers, baseball heads, to all my baseball heads out there. To all my baseball heads out there, as I always say, I watched the World Series, and this commercial ran, like this trailer or an abbreviated version of it ran consistently throughout, and so I think this was just a case of like they knew the strength of that image, and they also knew that they were reaching a new market with it. So
I agree. I think that's a very good point because I don't think they had put that out prior, anything other than just online, and so catching people who might be a little bit more in the target audience for what is a older show, because even if this is meant to be all ages, you're not talking about this being kids under 10. Looks like there's a bit too much violence. This is not quite like the violence in A New Hope or Star Wars, as Sam would like it to be called. I think this is a show that seems more age appropriate for older audiences, and you probably want to catch that audience who doesn't pay attention to every single beat from the trades or every single rumor about Star Wars.
Well, and you want to capture that older audience that watches baseball.
Wow.
that older audience.
Let's be honest, that older white American baseball fan is the predominant.
I'm not older.
Neither am I, and I enjoy myself some baseball. So we see the Mandalorian after we see actually some. I believe these are a different kind of creature, and I might be messing up the name because I thought they looked like dewbacks going across the top of some sort of canyon. But then a battle with the Mandalorian, hand-to-hand combat with some Tascadarians, I think. Same species as Bosk. We saw the still image of this quite some time ago that we talked about on the pod in an earlier edition. Carbonite freeze. Which clearly, I think at this point, being that this takes place after Return of the Jedi, it caught on. What Boba Fett did and how he stored Han Solo in carbonite clearly got around. The bounty hunters learned that this is a great way to transport your fare of what you needed to get with your bounty. I mean, I think this is pretty nice.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, because in Empire they make such a big deal about like it could kill him,
Is it
and
gonna
like
work?
it's never been done. Oh, that is really funny. I didn't piece that together. I did feel it was, I guess I'm going to say this is I'll call it a spoiler light maybe. It's not a spoiler. It's like 30 seconds, but it's in the trailer. I did feel like when you see the person frozen in carbonite and then you see like the shot later in the trailer of like the fight starting at the, bar or cantina like place, it's like, oh, it's that guy.
Yeah.
I was like, that's weird. Why did they show like why did they make it so clearly like his face that like, oh, we know how this one ends?
Yeah,
it's not really a spoiler.
I thought it was Werner Herzog is who's in the carbonite.
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah, because it looked like the jacket was similar.
Okay.
Sam, you and Star Wars jackets, my friend.
I'm in hog heaven because this is like all the people who look. I love the Jedi. I absolutely love them, and they have like a whole unique, sort of like samurai, desert style, like all to themselves. But as a jacket man, ooh, the smugglers and bounty hunters and
they've always had better jackets. Well, actual jackets.
They've always had jackets. Period. This is the jacket lover's delight.
We then see the carbonite freeze coming off of the ship of the Mandalorian, similar to what we saw in Empire, which I think is, again, just kind of cool to have similar imagery. A flash of a cantina with a lot of different characters, creatures. We know that Jon Favreau was inspired by the Mos Eisley Cantina and wanted to know more about the individuals who are in that, so not surprised we'd see that. And then all of this is voiced over by Werner Herzog's character, which is kind of awesome because he's just talking, oh, you're the best in the parsec, which is just hilarious to hear Werner Herzog say parsec.
It's great. And it also, like, I mean, it's I feel like this is one of those things that a certain generation of Star Wars fans loves. Like, it used to be a little, like, one of those tokens of knowledge. We talked about this actually last week on the 100th episode, where it was like little things you carried with you. You know, you mentioned it. Salacious Crumb was like a quiz, a pop quiz item that we all carried around with us, and this was another, like, parsecs are distance, not not time. And it was like a clever little factoid, and it seems like, you know, the writer of this episode, wherever this appears, it's like they're playing on that too, and they find it funny, so they're making it, you know, clearly, like, establishing it in the parsec is like clearly a measure of distance or space. You know, it's interesting.
I think probably the maybe standout moment, because we're looking for something new in this trailer. There's a couple, but I think when he walks out, when the Mandalorian walks out of a door and no look shoots a stormtrooper, it's just beautiful. That made me stop, and not a lot else in most of the recent trailers have made me stop, other than IG-11, Taika Waititi's character, doing his spinning in the first trailer that we saw, which we do see again in this one. But the moment where he actually just no look shoots a stormtrooper, I love it. It reminded me of Rogue One, where Donnie Yen was taking out stormtroopers with his staff and doing what I thought was different things that I had not seen before in a Star Wars movie, and that was really cool.
It's very, very cool. It's a very, like, cowboy western.
Yeah.
Almost. It's also like vaguely John Wick.
Yeah, it is.
Which
You're
is
right.
which is pretty cool, and that's like, you know, they're not afraid to. I mean, again, that reminded me so much of John Wick. It's like they're not afraid to crib from, you know, modern Western, modern pop culture, which is very, you know, very George Lucas. That's what he was doing. He was taking imagery and iconography he liked. It's a very cool moment. I think for me, one of the just standouts from this trailer was, you know, they have a couple longer shots of the ship in action and flying, and I think it's one of the first times where I think ships flying through space, or, you know, like planets on a TV show, doesn't look like, it looks like a movie.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked a lot about, there's been a lot published about the budget and how much this cost, and I know that's honestly, that's the way they can achieve that. But, you know, I think back, the last time I sort of had that thought was, I remember watching the 04 Battlestar Galactica, and that was like the first time they'd ever done the sort of the like crash zooms and like rack focuses between ships flying in space, and it was that I'd seen, and it was like a new technique that added, in my mind, so much depth and like the documentary style camera to ships in space, like, added a layer of reality to it. And it's like, this feels like we're one level beyond that, where now we're starting to get, you know, cinema quality assets and effects work and budgets, I guess, on TV, which is pretty cool.
It's incredible. It is everything that I ever dreamed of as a kid.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean you go. The costume, the Mandalorian, like the Boba Fett inspired Mandalorian costume, that goes back to Macquarie and Lucas. It's like, what awesome iconography. Like, he still looks so cool. It's, you know, it's 40 years later, and this character's like silhouette is, you know, it's like some, you know, it's
iconic.
It's iconic. It's almost like, what's a comic book character with an iconic silhouette? It's like something that's just timeless, that no matter when you see it, it looks cool.
Get those cards ready, people.
Batman.
All right. We got the trifecta in. Hat trick, everybody. It doesn't apply to the World Series, but it's still a sports term.
Yeah, and we're nothing if not carelessly and wantonly throwing around sports terms on our Star Wars podcast.
Yeah, I mean, really, you hit it out of the park on that one, Sam.
It's a touchdown.
You know, but the way you talked about it, I was thinking just moments ago, we are in the Halloween season. You may be listening to this into a bit of November, but hey, we're still close enough to Halloween. I I want to get a absolutely perfect screen realistic Mandalorian costume, and I haven't even seen this series. I haven't even seen more than these trailers, and it looks that good that I want that costume. I might be a Mando Merc before this is all said and done.
I'm still back at. I wish instead of "it's a touchdown," I said "it's up, it's good." But but yeah, I want to like it. I think that the Mandalorian or Boba Fett costume, that's one of the ones that I would actually, I think, like be down to dress up in and wear. It's tough, with each. I used to really get into Halloween. I like for a long time. Much longer than I probably should have, would dress some stuff in it. It's getting increasingly hard to like invest time or money in it. And especially to, in any way that's competitive, because you look at what people do at Comic-Cons and different conventions and things, and they have, people make at home screen accurate, worthy, with moving mechanical parts and lights and smoke and everything, that like just amazing costuming. But this would be a pretty cool one.
Well, and shout out to the Mando Mercs who do that all the time. This is the first time we really talked about them on the podcast. The Mandalorian fans, really, they've taken on that mantra of the Mandalorian, and I'm sure they cannot wait even more for this series to begin. But other things, as this trailer goes, we see a pretty cool new creature. We don't know. I think StarWars.com might have named the creature, but pulling the Mandalorian across some open field. We see the cockpit, some speeder bikes going off into the desert, which is always a great shot. And reminding me a bit of Rebels. I think the first episode of Rebels is when they're on Lothal and Ezra steals a speeder bike and from Kanan, and they end up just doing some sort of like race back and forth, or he also steals it from the stormtroopers. But it just made me be like, oh yeah, Dave Filoni's part of this. Dave Filoni's going to make this an incredible, Jon Favreau might be bringing a lot of great touch points, but I feel like Filoni's going to make this Star Wars. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's a perfect way to say it. I think, we always talk about, Filoni was kind of the heir apparent, and how that manifests, once he's obviously working on the continuation of the Clone Wars. He's obviously done an episode here of Mandalorian. It'll be really interesting to see. Does he eventually do a film? Does he do his own series? Does what? I do think where he goes is going to be fascinating.
He's involved in all of the Mandalorian. He's directing one episode, but I think he's actually involved in the whole.
Yes,
the whole.
No, I think
season.
You're right. I think he's kind of a co-showrunner.
Yeah, that's the sense. Well, if anybody watched the episode of Chef where they cook at Lucasfilm and it's Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, which I think we know very well all of our opinions on Chef, but if you want to see the two of them, they're pretty. They seem like they were really working on the whole thing together, and I think they even talked about we're writing or wrapping up episode 7 as they were doing that cook on Chef.
Sorry, Mike. Netflix is the Titanic. It's going down. I don't watch things on it.
No, it doesn't actually catch your eye at all. You never even open the app. You don't. Why would you?
I open the app a few times a week to watch The Great British Bake Off with my wife, which is delightful, and I enjoy it, I think, as much as she does.
You know what? We could just get a Great British Bake Off Star Wars crossover. Why not? Mary Berry testing some. What is the most famous Star Wars dish? I guess she'd make her own at Blue Milk, but
now it's Prue. It's not Mary Berry. And if you're following all the gossip, it seems like Michael and Henry could be an item. Pretty exciting.
Okay, then I'm not caught up. Clearly, as we go forward,
Mike, you're embarrassing yourself.
We see a bit of Carl Weathers. We see a bit of Gina Carano. There's a moment where it even sort of looks like we do see what seems to be a family in distress. As a village or a city is being bombarded. But then there's a moment where it looks like the Mandalorian's going to take his helmet off, but I'm getting the sense from a lot of interviews that helmet really never comes off. If it does, it's minimal, because Pedro Pascal has even said most of his acting is done in the helmet. They may be also just trying to conceal some things that will happen in the series. I think it'd be surprising if they don't get some pretty prolonged scenes with him out of his helmet.
It seems like there has to be. I think there might be something to the effect that, like, it might have to do with sort of you know, in public, he's always in the helmet. You know, in public within the world of the series, which I think would be smart. Again, we're talking about the iconography of that you know, costume and that silhouette. You know, I'm definitely happy that it doesn't appear that they're going the route of like having him appear in the helmet and then not in the helmet for the whole series. You know, but yeah, I'm excited. When you mentioned like the quick, you know, no look shot earlier, but there's also like immediately following that, there's the quick frame where it's like he gets shot in the shoulder and it just like deflects, and it kind of displays the strength and fortitude of the Mandalorian armor. It's pretty cool. And there's more lore to that I don't think we are as well aware of, because within the Clone Wars there's a lot of lore for the Mandalorian. We'll probably learn more about the Mandalorians in this series, but there is not only a special significance to that armor, but the reason I think Boba Fett took that armor was because it was one of the stronger pieces of armor. Durable. Durability was the word. I said fortitude. I wanted durability.
You know, this is one of those podcasts that you really wish you could roll back a lot. Right,
Ryan, you could just if you could edit in me saying it's up, it's good, and then also if you could edit in me saying here, I'll give it to you clean. Durability. If you could just cut that in, I was about
to say you need to give it to him clean, because the first one you did not. It made it really difficult for Ryan to be able to cut that. So I think let's move on. We got to wrap this up.
It's up, it's good.
So we get Giancarlo Esposito. We then get what seems to be a firefight. We see Gina Carano facing off down an alleyway, but what's on the other side? Is it Bill Burr? The comedian? The Bostonian comedian with two blasters and another blaster on his shoulder. There's a story here that I think we need to know more about, and maybe it's already out there. If you know, let us know at droidspot@gmail.com. But what is Bill Burr doing in this series?
You're talking about Bill Burr from episode 1 of Chef on Netflix?
Is he in episode 1 of Chef? Well, there you go. There's the answer, I guess.
He's in an episode, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, man.
I think he and Favs are boys.
So if he's in this episode, how do they bleep him constantly? Is he just says hello, they cut back, it's really awkward because there's really no way that he can do something that's Disney, Star Wars, PG safe?
Well, as you said during our podcast within a podcast, Base Buddies with Mike and Sam, like you mentioned that this is targeting a more adult audience. That's why they're targeting us oldies. Us oldies. So they said, hey, who do those old white men who watch baseball love? Bill Burr, baby. Get him in there. And it's a home run.
Oh, man.
What a moonshot.
They're hitting for the cycle today.
Touch them all.
All right, we're done. The other shot that actually looks pretty incredible is the Mandalorian flying in. He's roped himself onto the top of a TIE fighter, and you see him looking down. I think it's Giancarlo Esposito that's in the cockpit. And that's up off the planet's surface. The Mandalorian is trying to make his way into a TIE. That whets my appetite. I'm pretty excited.
It's a great shot. I think you're right. I mean, it's certainly edited to look like Giancarlo Esposito there, and it's one of those great moves that makes you think of, like, you know, a hero jumping on the top of a train or the roof of a car, or grabbing on, it's like, how could he possibly survive this? It's he's in a plane with no parachute. So it's definitely the stakes are raised, and it's something we haven't seen in Star Wars before. So it's pretty exciting.
It is, and I think that pretty much caps off this trailer. I think there's a moment at the end. I don't recall the line, and I can't play it right now. But there's a moment where, it's almost a setup of like, "Are you ready?" And he says, it doesn't say literally, but like, "Bring them on," or whatever it is at the end, where it was just kind of a nice way to cap it off.
I think he just says good. I think he just says good.
Does he? Okay.
Which, again, I mean, I think they're really playing it close to the chest about how much dialogue is actually going to be in this. How much are we going to hear and see of the actual Mandalorian himself?
Yep. And it says, look outside. They're waiting for you. And let's see if you're right, Sam. Does he just say good? He says, yeah, good. So you missed one word, but pretty close, Sam. Pretty well done.
I'll take it. Thank you.
Well, there's still more that we would love to talk about, but that's pretty much going to do it for our time on this edition of the Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars podcast. For the most part, buttoned up. I mean, we got a little sidetracked. We didn't get too into wings, sadly. I think this is going to be my new bit. Every episode, I'm going to end and be like, an apologies to the cast of Wings. We had an interview scheduled with you. Pull the Jimmy Kimmel and just never get to our Wings interviews. Tim Daly, I'm apologizing to you. This is really, I'm sure.
I was going to say, Tim Daly's in my living room right now. He's just head in hands.
He flew all the way out for this. Why? That will do it for this week's edition of the Droids You're Looking For, a Star Wars podcast. It's Mandalorian season, everybody. It's not Thanksgiving. It's not holidays. It's Mandalorian season.
What they Mandy? Also, I just want to be clear, this is staying in the episode. Touch 'em all is a reference to all the 4 bases that you touch whenever you hit a home run. It's not a problematic phrase. It's not a problematic thing.
Sam, we got enough baseball fans listening to this podcast. Come on. I think touch 'em all is all right. I appreciate you trying to save it, but I think you're all right.
Okay, Ryan, cut this bit because now I've made it weird.